Is it possible that such so-called death rays could have been used before, perhaps in ancient times?
Probably the most famous ancient death ray was the one that was built by the Greek inventor Archimedes. He was able to create this giant mirror and parabolic disc and focus the sun's rays on the fleet and set these ships on fire.
But how could Archimedes have conceived such a formidable weapon, one far in advance of any known at the time? If death ray type weapons had been used in ancient times, might there be some sort of tangible proof? Perhaps there is. Here, scattered throughout the Scottish countryside, can be found numerous ancient ruins. Many appear to have been forts or other enclosures, dating back thousands of years. Remarkably, they also appear to have been subjected to fire and heat, so intense it practically turned the stone structures into glass. It's a process more scientifically known as vitrification.
Here you have these stone buildings in which an analysis of the outside comes to the conclusion that they were heated to over 1,000 degrees Celsius in temperature. Conventional fire could not have reached this heat.
According to Celtic legend, there once was a god named Lugh, also known as the Shining One, the sun god, and the god of war. Like the Greek god Zeus, Lugh was said to wield a mighty magic spear, not unlike the thunderbolts of his Greek counterpart.
When battle was near, Lugh would draw out his spear, and it roared, and then flashes of fire came out of it, and it tore through the ranks of the enemy, never tired of killing and slaying.
Is it possible that what the Celtic legends are describing as Lugh is in fact an alien general or other kind of extraterrestrial leader in possession of a devastating weapon?
All these descriptions of sophisticated weaponry sounds almost like science fiction, but is it really? Because we have those weapons today. And I think it is merely a reinvention of history. That all the stuff that we have today has been around before, and that our past is not science fiction, but science fact.
He was a seer, a visionary, the inventor of remote control. The motors that we use today.
It's the wireless transmission of radio signals.
Electricity available 24/7, anywhere you live on the Earth.
Even more than the 20th century.
The man of the 20th century. Many might still know who he was, but his name surely rings a bell, and they are certainly familiar with his incredible inventions. Nikola Tesla is the man who had lit the previous century and bridged the gap leading into the next, with over 900 patents approved across his lifetime. We owe him everything from LED lights, alternating current, Tesla turbine, Tesla coil, radio and remote control, the magnifying transmitter, neon lamp, X-rays, Adams power plant transformer house, induction motor, electric cars, robotics, laser, wireless communications and limitless free energy, artificial tidal wave to electric-powered supersonic airship or death beam, and many, many other patents.
Tesla was making very substantial claims about so-called teleforce rays that could bring down airplanes from thousands of miles away.
His interest in building what we now call robots, but he built that remote control boat 2 decades before the word robot was even coined.
He was working on radio-controlled torpedoes, robot ships, all sorts of things.
And these are all inventions on the surface. inventions that humans at that stage of evolution could grasp and understand. However, few people know that Nikola Tesla had tapped into a source of unlimited energy.
He thought that the Earth itself was like a giant condenser, that the Earth contained a great deal of natural energy,
and was on the verge of handing the people of this planet a gift of free energy until the powers that be had stopped him in his tracks. The most important thing Tesla required in order to accomplish his plan was funding. He was an inventor, not a businessman. So during his lifetime, he came across various hurdles that would hinder his progress towards the future he envisioned for humanity. Even so, Tesla pursued his dreams until his final hour. Not only he wished to give free, wireless energy to the world, he also wanted to establish long-lasting peace on Earth. For this goal alone, he designed the perfect plan. He would engineer a weapon so powerful that its energy bursts would bring down a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 200 miles from a defending nation's border, and will cause armies to drop dead in their tracks.
Tesla claimed that his death beam would be able to destroy an attacking enemy air fleet. He said that this would also be able to stop an enemy army, up to 1 million men.
By constructing this tremendously powerful apparatus and distributing it to all leading nations, he would ensure that war would not make sense anymore, since everyone would have an impenetrable offensive and defensive force. Tesla thought that by selling his invention to the world's superpowers, he would receive the funding required to carry on with his ultimate experiment of generating unlimited energy.
Tesla was convinced that if he could tap the resonance energy of the Earth, that he would be able to create waves that would, in theory, never dissipate.
He initially reached out to J.P. Morgan Jr.
Damn it, Tesla. Please. Wireless electricity for the world, and all one needs is a cheap little device to receive it. How do you charge people for that? There's no goddamn profit in it, you vainglorious idiot.
At a time when war clouds were once again forming above Europe. I have made recent discoveries of inestimable value. The flying machine has completely demoralized the world, so much that in some cities, as London and Paris, people are in mortal fear from aerial bombing. The new means I have perfected afford absolute protection against this and other forms of attack. Nonetheless, Morgan was unconvinced of Tesla's idea. He then tried to persuade Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain. His proposal was diligently considered, but upon Chamberlain's resignation after Hitler had outmaneuvered him at Munich, the interest shown toward this anti-war weapon had plunged. After several failed attempts to raise awareness of his superweapon and its capabilities, Tesla published a treatise in 1937 called The Art of Projecting Concentrated Non-Dispersive Energy Through the Natural Media. The thesis offered viable technicalities about this all-powerful invention that, as Tesla claimed, would put an end to all war. The original document is preserved to this day inside the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. After this move, Tesla had caught the attention of the Russians, who expressed a great deal of interest toward his invention. So, during the same year, Nikola Tesla had presented a more elaborate version of his plan to the Armtorg Trading Corporation, an alleged Soviet arms front in New York City. In 1939, the year the Second World War had begun, the first stage of this superweapons prototype was successfully tested in the USSR. To honor the agreement, Tesla received a check for $25,000 that would further allow him to fund his research. Of course, Tesla had passed from this existence 4 years later, without seeing some of his most intriguing inventions being used on a large scale.
There are some theories that suggest that Tesla might have been killed over his invention of the particle weapon. And certainly there are a lot of people who suggest that Tesla's papers and notes for a particle beam weapon were stolen so that nefarious governments could work on them.
So when he passed away, he took his secrets to the afterlife. However, the Russians, who had previously bought some of his blueprints, as well as the US, who had extracted through the FBI whatever work Tesla kept in his Colorado Springs laboratory, had cracked most of his riddles as time progressed and have managed to weaponize the Tesla scalar wave effects. In 1975, during the SALT talks, Leonid Brezhnev, General Secretary of the Soviet Union at the time, had stressed that the development of new war weapons should be drastically limited because they have already become more frightening than the mind of man had imagined.
Official investigation into UFOs.
The German government took death rays very seriously.
The Nazis probably would have been interested in the particle beam weapon as one of several devices that they could use to terrorize another population.
The U.S. was engaged in fighting Hitler and the Nazis and trying to take over the world. So a weapon such as a death ray being developed by Tesla, falling into the wrong hands, could have been devastating.
Needless to say, most of the weapons in cause pertained to Tesla. His superweapon, dubbed Teleforce, was fully operational under the Soviet Union as early as the 70s. Now called the Sereshagin howitzer, the humongous Tesla scalar interferometer was exactly as Tesla had described it. It encompasses 4 modes of operation. The first one is the Tesla shield. It runs continuously and generates a thin, impenetrable hemispherical wall of energy over a selected area. It has defensive purposes and works as follows. By interfering 2 Fourier expansions and 3-dimensional scalar hemispherical patterns in space, they join into a dome-like shield of electromagnetic energy. Air molecules and atoms trapped inside are fully ionized, displaying an intense and vivid light. Any physical object that attempts to pass through this shield will receive a considerable discharge of electrical energy and will be vaporized in an instant. By stacking these energetic shells, they will deter any gamma radiation or EMPs coming its way. The second mode is more offensive. Utilizing 2 truncated Fourier transformers, the device shoots a 3-dimensional scalar 5-field pulse. A second pulse is then released, traveling at a faster velocity and overtaking the first one, merging into a deadly EMP of electromagnetic energy. The third mode is the same pulse variation ran continuously. Thus, 2 continuous scalar waves are sent forward, merging into vector energy at their target destination. According to some researchers, this is the exact way in which Tesla planned to transmit wireless energy, and also the weapon would annihilate hundreds of aircrafts and entire armies. The final mode, dubbed Time Squeeze, will let the user play with things like anti-gravity, dematerialization and materialization, transmutation, and it provides a great deal of medical benefits. Other effects may include subliminal and superliminal communication, seeing through Earth and the ocean, as well as reaching higher orders of reality. This is apparently possible because the human being has, between his ears, a Tesla scalar interferometer. This tiny biological device accounts for most parapsychological phenomena. It can also be triggered naturally through practice and meditation. The technology behind Tesla's weapons is nothing new to modern man. They fall in the category of directed energy weapons, or DEWs, which are long-range weapon systems that inflict damage at a selected target by emitting powerful, focused bursts of energy. These emissions are either laser, microwaves, or particle beams. With such weapons at the disposal of world powers, it's easy to understand why another world war hasn't broken out by now. With his daring plan to arm all nations with this superweapon, it appears that Nikola Tesla has reached one of his end goals of establishing long-lasting peace between nations.
So when Nikola Tesla stated adamantly a month before his death that he had perfected the death ray, which would essentially just make planes fall out of the sky, you have to start to wonder, had he figured that out? Now, with all of that said, let me transition into the cover-up and conspiracy. So for decades after the FBI raided Nikola Tesla's hotel room and took possession of all of his paperwork and other belongings, they claimed that they immediately handed over to the Office of Alien Property Custodian, which was odd, by the way, because Nikola Tesla had already been a U.S. citizen for more than 50 years. But ultimately, this was in the heart of World War II, and they wanted to make sure that there was nothing within his possession that could be, well, the information could be utilized by the enemy. But what's odd is that the government actually held on to all of his possessions for 9 years. Not until 1952 is when they finally released all of his possessions and paperwork back over to his family overseas in Belgrade. So in 2013, the FBI was required to release documentation on Nikola Tesla following a request filed through the Freedom of Information Act. And you can actually see these documents online through the FBI's website. But these declassified documents caught the FBI red-handed in multiple lies. In fact, the FBI was interviewed in 2008 by Wired.com in order to discuss the 10 greatest myths ever about the FBI. And number 10 was, get this, about them having Nikola Tesla's plans for a death ray. Let me read to you, and I quote, "Despite long-standing reports and rumors, the FBI was not involved in searching Tesla's effects, and it never had possession of his papers or any microfilm that may have been made of those papers. Since 1943, we have told a consistent story to all who have asked. Reports to the contrary appear to be based on an initial confusion of FBI agents with other government officials, especially Alien Property Office personnel. These rumors have been repeated in biographies and articles on Tesla without double-checking the facts as reported in our files. But when these files were declassified 5 years later, well, it caught them in more than one lie." Now, before I show you those documents, there's one really important aspect of this case, and it's really odd. So, Professor John G. Trump, who worked at MIT, was the person chosen to review all of Tesla's documents, and in less than 3 days after Nikola Tesla's property was confiscated by the FBI and handed over to the Office of Alien Custodian, John G. Trump announced to the world that no, there was nothing significant in these files, and that ultimately it did not contain any plans of anything of significant. In fact, I quote, "Tesla's thoughts and efforts during at least the last 15 years were primarily of speculative, philosophical, and somewhat promotional character, often concerned with the production and wireless transmission of power, but did not include new, sound, workable principles or methods for realizing such results." Yet when you look at this declassified document to the director of the FBI, it specifically states that we believe that certain of Tesla's papers may contain basic principles which would be of considerable value to certain ongoing research within the DoD, the Department of Defense. It would be truly helpful to have access to his papers. But besides that, the declassified documents from the FBI literally discuss that although Tesla wrote in English, his penmanship was small, blurred, and so difficult to translate as a foreign language. And in these same documents, in fact, multiple documents state that the FBI did have microfilm. So essentially, they took photos, copies of every single one of Tesla's documents. So when they stated for decades that, no, we don't have Tesla's paperwork, no. Okay, yeah, they didn't have his paperwork, but they had copies of it. So they deliberately manipulated their words in order to convince those that were asking that, no, we don't have anything on him, which was a direct omission of truth, which is interesting. I mean, the FBI, they're officers of the court. And in court, if you omit the truth, well, that's a perjury. That's a felony. But to make everything even more suspicious, out of more than 300 documents that were released by the FBI, a significant amount of them have overwhelming redactions on these papers to the point where you can't even read them. And although most of the papers are just blank and you could read them on your own, an unbelievable amount of them have significant redactions. Look at these Sharpie outs. You can't even read this stuff. Like, what does it say, and why is it being left out 73 years later after his death? But if you want another indicator of dishonest behavior on behalf of the FBI, the very last document they have on Nikola Tesla before he died was back in September of 1940, which was a memo written to the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, suggesting that they put 24/7 or constant surveillance on Nikola Tesla without his knowing in order to prevent him from being kidnapped by the enemy and essentially being tortured for information involving his technologies and inventions. And then after this, there's not a single document for 2.5 years later until his death in 1943. So despite the fact that the FBI has dozens and dozens of correspondence and documentation related to Nikola Tesla before his death, the FBI director gets a suggestion that he put on surveillance on Tesla, and there's nothing after that. Not a yes that set up the surveillance, not a no, not a maybe, nothing. Do they really expect us to believe that? Does that make any sense, that it wouldn't even warrant a reply whatsoever? I mean, do you believe that? I don't. So here's the part about the CIA. So you might remember 2 days before President Obama left office in January of 2017, he declassified nearly 13 million documents from the CIA, which made headlines all around the world because they discussed various things such as psychic abilities, UFOs, even CIA torture practices on detainees and terrorists. But one thing that was just not mentioned, and I have not seen anything online, internet forums, YouTube, that discussed the fact that Nikola Tesla is also contained in those files. I took it upon myself to literally just type in, and anyone can do this, by the way. Go to CIA.gov, click on the Freedom of Information Act, and type in Nikola Tesla, which is what I did. And I was shocked to see that, yeah, they have several documents on him. Now, besides the fact that there are redactions, blacked out marks, or even more pretty-looking whiteout marks, as you can see here, these documents indicate that they had a secret investigation to Nikola Tesla's sites overseas. They had inventories, they took names, and I mean, who knows what else they left out. But there's clearly missing documents here as well. I mean, where's the documents leading up to this investigation? Where's the documents at the end of the investigation? But here's the one thing that sticks out. So many people were wondering why it took the government 9 years to release Tesla's property to his family. Well, these documents from the CIA indicate that they concluded their investigation in 1952, which just so happens to be the very same year that Nikola Tesla's property was handed back over to his family in Belgrade. Do you really think that that's just a coincidence? So in other words, this explains what they were doing. They were conducting an investigation on who knows what involving his facilities for who knows what reasons. But it shows this, and nobody's aware of this. The CIA, which wasn't even created for 4 years after Tesla died, was conducting an investigation on him in his overseas facilities. Why is that? So when you connect the dots in everything I've discussed, the FBI lying over 7 decades about Nikola Tesla, the fact that they did have copies of his documentation and they manipulated the wording in order to confuse others and essentially tell a lie, the fact that they have all these redactions 73 years after his death, the fact that the CIA was doing a secret investigation on Tesla, and that the government just so happens to release all this documentation on the precise time frame and year that the CIA concluded that investigation. And then you have Nikola Tesla, somebody that's known to have outstanding character, that wanted to help humanity, that died poor and has been shunned by the mainstream and our academics, which is pretty weird, don't you think? When you had all these things together, and the fact that he was adamant that he had created the ability, the technology to harness free technology for the entire world, or free energy, I should say, wireless energy, or the death ray, and many other things. When you add all these things together, and you look at the behavior on behalf of the government, well, guys, what are you left with? It's beyond obvious that there is absolutely a cover-up here. They have some sort of technology of, that Tesla had. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if you look up what's called the active denial system or the heat gun. I wouldn't be surprised if that's based on Tesla's technology referring to the death ray. Maybe different, obviously. But look, where does it go from here? Bottom line is that the government clearly still has documentation on Tesla. The CIA files and the FBI files both indicate that they have not released everything. I mean, think about it. The FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, receives a memo suggesting they put constant surveillance on him, and then for 2.5 years later, there's not a single shred of correspondence on him altogether? Give me a break. Hopefully there's some up-and-coming, hungry lawyer that's familiar with the Freedom of Information Act that looks over this information and decides to make a name for themselves. Anyways, guys, I'll leave it at that. I'm Jimmy. This is Bright Insight. Like and subscribe and leave me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll also include a link for my other videos on Nikola Tesla as well. Take care, everybody.